Hello, this is Taya Graham, and welcome to the Police Accountability Report, Know Your Rights, Protect Your Rights Livestream, a show where we will talk to people who know how to do both to give you the tools and the perspective. Oh no! Sorry, I'm having a little issue. Dave, I'm having a little technical issue. Yeah. Sorry, you guys. This is a show where we will talk to people who know how to do both to give you the tools and the perspective to ensure that when and if police challenge you, you are prepared. But we're also going to delve deeper into why American law enforcement can seem so interested in entangling people in the legal system rather than improving public safety, and what we can do not to just fight back, but think back, meaning how we can collectively think of ways to create a community where police aren't in charge, but we are, and that law enforcement serves us and not the other way around. And to make this happen, I am so excited to share this with you. We have two guests who have a tremendous amount of experience and expertise, both dealing with cops and in one case, actually being a cop. The latter is a former cop turned cop watcher, James Madison, who's known for his unique insider's perspective on how police use their law, often to their advantage, or they sometimes choose to ignore the law entirely, and what you can do to counter it when they do. Also, he has an exceptional investigation he is working on, and you all will be some of the first people to see parts of it here on our channel. Then we will be talking to the legendary James Freeman, who is actually fighting the entire justice system to protect his right to hold them accountable. It is an absolutely epic battle between transparency and power to keep the inner workings of government secret, which we will be unpacking for you in all its ugly details. And at the end of the show, there will be a special shout out to all my Patreon patrons for their kind support. It's just one small way I try to show the people that help this show and make it possible, show them how much I appreciate them. And during the show, I will try to get your comments on the screen and answer some of your questions for our guests. But please remember, this is live. As you may have noticed, this is very, very live. So please try to be patient with any technical glitches we might have. But before we get to that, I want to turn to my reporting partner, Stephen Janis. Stephen, hey, Dave, do you think you could find Stephen on the live stream? Stephen,
wow,
we have a live stream tonight. Stephen, seriously.
Taya, what do you?
We have a live.
What do you?
We have a
what do
live.
you want?
Stephen, we have a live
We
stream.
have a live stream tonight? Are you kidding me? Look, I'm doing
I'm not
fine
kidding.
out here, Taya. Thanks for having me, but no thanks tonight. And
Stephen, get in here right now.
All right, okay. I'm raising my hands.
Drop the
You
nuts.
can see my hands.
Jesus,
I'm coming in.
Would you please drop the nuts? Thank you.
I'm coming inside.
Thank you.
Don't worry. Here I
cannot
come.
believe this. I seriously can't believe this. You know what? It's technical difficulty after technical difficulty tonight. Honestly, I think Stephen's getting a little too uncomfortable outside. But while we're waiting for him to get inside the studio, let me share with you, our audience, how we intend to break down these stories for you and why they're essential and why, as we always say, you have the right to be informed. I think the idea for this show started with our investigative report on Texas firefighter Thomas C. As you remember, Thomas was pulled over by the Denton County Sheriff's Department in April of 2021 for what they say was speeding, although Thomas denies this. After he was pulled over, however, police had a different agenda. That's because they immediately started to accuse Thomas of being drunk. Now, first, it's worth noting that Thomas has not had a drink for 30 years, and he does not use illegal drugs of any kind. But that didn't stop police from charging him with a DUI. Let's just watch a little bit of what transpired.
Hello, I'm Deputy Brent with the Denton County Sheriff's Office. I didn't catch you earlier. Where were you coming from today?
Yeah, my left. Yeah, you're right.
What happened to your eye again? I only caught part of that.
I had
story.
a detached retina, and then the subsequent surgeries have led to it. It's kind of got a blue haze right now, and so it's just hard to see through this eye. But sometimes it gets kind of irritated, it turns red, and I don't know if it is now, but
it looks a little irritated right now.
Yeah.
Is it really? And is this one
that's clear?
Clear. Okay. Yeah. So.
Okay. When's the last time you took any medication today?
Oh, like 3
o'clock today?
2 o'clock or something.
At this point, I just want to ensure you're safe to operate a vehicle. Just given kind of everything I've seen so far, I just want to make sure you're safe to operate your truck. So we're going to run you through just a few standardized field tests, and we'll kind of go from there. Okay. All right. Have you had traumatic brain injury?
No.
Okay, nothing like that. Other than detached retina, any other medical issues?
No.
Okay. Nothing like that?
No.
Diabetes, hypertension?
Well, I've had hypertension.
Okay.
I've taken medicine. Was taking medicine for it.
Okay. Other than Adderall, are we taking anything else right now? Just Adderall? And what's the Adderall for?
Attention deficit.
ADHD?
Yeah.
Okay, or ADD? Okay. All right, you can set them up.
Just stand right here on the flat ground, facing me. Put your legs together, feet together like this. Put your arms down by your side like this.
And so I asked them, like, well, what else besides your eye hurts? Anything else? No, just my eye. I mean, I gave him every opportunity to explain to me, like, legs aren't working right, arms aren't working right. He came out of the truck looking good, like, walking pretty decent. A little heavy-footed, but, like, he wasn't stumbling out. Do you believe he's intoxicated?
I believe he's unable to drive from whatever he has. I don't know about
Is that
alcohol.
a medical emergency, or are we talking about intoxication?
Intoxicated on something, but I don't think alcohol.
Do you think they have, like, a medical emergency here?
No.
Okay. So if it's not a medical emergency, is he normal, or would you believe possibly he's intoxicated under something?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
he's intoxicated on something.
We're probably going to go that route. We're probably going to try to do a DRE.
Well, thank you for gracing the studio with your presence,
You could have
Stephen.
told me we had a live stream.
I think I
was
did.
outside. I was outside. I was comfortable. I was
Yeah.
there for the night.
Yes,
I
I
had
know.
my freaking corn nuts.
I know. But
I
you
mean,
have other
this
obligations.
stupid
I
mic
think you're
just
getting
never-
a little too
Do
comfortable
I use
out
this
there.
mic or this one?
I think you use this one,
Okay.
the bigger
Sorry.
one. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's nice out there. I'm learning a lot. There's a lot of things that happen. Bringing me inside just kind of messes up my vibe as a reporter. I am breaking stories constantly out there reporting, and you're like, oh, come on in for a live stream. But what do I get out of it?
Well, you know what, Stephen? The problem is that everyone
Corn
loves
nuts are not enough for a man.
to survive.
I need
on.
more than that.
Listen, everyone expects you to be a hard-nosed investigative
Yes.
reporter. You got to give the people what they want. That means you got to be out there, beating the streets,
Okay.
putting in that work. Okay.
Let me just put it this way. I'm willing to do a documentary about what it's like to be outside. I'm willing to do a documentary to tell the secrets. A lot of people ask me about our esteemed editor, Max, the famous Maximilian Alvarez. I'm willing to give you guys the inside scoop. But I need one thing. We need to raise a little money
Oh,
tonight.
we have super chats tonight, I think.
Yeah, we have super chats.
That's right. We actually have super chats for the first time tonight,
Yeah.
so I'm really
So
psyched.
I'm just saying to people out here, if you want to know what I was actually doing before Taya interrupted me,
I guess
and
it
what
was a
really goes
rude
on outside,
interruption, yeah.
we need to raise some money, but not a lot. A couple $100 would be nice, so I can hire a director, cinematographer, some of the things I need to, execute
You're
my
just
vision.
trying to get more coffee and corn nuts.
Hey, these things are really expensive and they're hard to find. So, but nevertheless, I am inside now, so I'm here. I'm ready to participate, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about Thomas's case.
Well, actually, as I was saying, Stephen,
Go ahead.
you will see the cops basically charged Thomas due to a highly subjective and easy to fail field sobriety test, which, Stephen, you've learned has literally almost no scientific basis.
What's really interesting about this is I did some research because I thought there was so much subjectivity when we looked at the documents, having, your clothes being like ruffled or
disheveled
yeah.
or the way that was like his attitude. Was it apologetic? Was
Yeah.
it irritable? Like just so many subtleties that
Yeah.
are so subjective when it comes to a cop's determination.
And we talk about the law enforcement industrial complex. But this is the forensic industrial complex where they create things. This was created out of whole cloth by a couple of psychology professors. Nothing scientific about it. And also really, so the entirety of this idea of a field sobriety test, and it varies from state to state. There's nothing scientific. It fails every time to really learn if a person is drunk or not. And it's highly like just made up out of whole cloth. And so if I'm not going to go through all the actual research, but I can say this very specifically. There is no scientific basis for a field sobriety test. And yet, in this particular case, in Thomas's case, it was the sole justification for arresting him. And that's the problem. I don't think any of us have a problem with a police officer using some subjective diagnostic tools or even subjective judgment when they're investigating someone. But to ruin a man's life over your impression that he was talking slowly, or he was a little heavy-footed, or some of the other subjective ways they now analyze it, I think is, especially in light that we have breathalyzers and that we have blood tests, I just think is highly problematic. And I think what this particular type of law enforcement diagnostic tool shows is that there's this sheen of absolute certainty that rubs off on these things over time, because over time they just become recirculated. We had an example out in Colorado where people were inexplicably using ketamine during arrests to subdue people, and people died, and they're like, how did this happen? And no one really knew. When I dug into it, it was almost impossible to figure out. So in this case, I think we need to call into question this way. None of us support drunk driving, and all of us think it's serious. But we should not have a system that is completely dependent upon the subjective, and I think the bias. I mean, I think that the most interesting thing about Thomas's case is I think they'd already made up their minds. They just needed a stat. I mean, we're still looking into it, and we'll get to that. But yes, these tests are completely subject to the officer's whim, and that's very scary and very dangerous considering the consequences for either getting it wrong or getting it right.
You know, Stephen, you actually have an update. You did not let go of this story.
Right.
I know that you were very moved by what happened to Thomas, the ending of his career and the loss of his firefighting family, but you kept on pressing and asking questions.
Yeah.
Maybe you can share.
Well, so here's the biggest thing. Now, everyone knows, you know, in a misdemeanor case or any sort of criminal case, there's supposed to be a judge and a prosecutor as a check on the police. Police can charge anything they want, and it goes into a court, and a prosecutor looks at it and says, well, this evidence is weak, or a judge. Well, it turns out Thomas's case never made it to the prosecutors. I asked the Denton County Prosecutor's Office, do you have this case in your system? You know, why are you prosecuting? I didn't even really ask them that. I said, why are you prosecuting this case, given, you know, the evidence is so flimsy? And she wrote me back and said, there is no record of this case. This case never existed. So think about that, the profound consequences for Thomas. Thomas is fired from his job. They do an internal investigation, and yet there's no case in the system. He has to hire a lawyer, pay thousands of dollars. There's no case in the system. So I went back to the Denton County Sheriff's Office, and I said, well, this case isn't in the system. Where is it? And you actually sent the email to their spokesperson. And a couple days later, they got back and said, oh, yeah, we tried to submit the evidence after the statute of limitations had expired. So it's literally insane how they tortured this poor man, how they extended this case for 2 years. He didn't even know it was in the system. And technically, it was not an active case. They said, we tried to put it in the system after the statute of limitations expired, and the system rejected it. Well, you're law enforcement. You don't pay attention to the statute of limitations. It's a misdemeanor in Texas. So it's only 2 years you got to get your case in. They blame the crime lab, but they'd already had a negative test on the alcohol, so they had a 0 on that. So they didn't have a narcotics test. They weren't going to get anything anyway. They just made this man miserable. And then when I said, could you release the blood test on the narcotics? Because we'd like to know what you found. And they said, no, we can't release it because of the public shield laws that don't allow you to release information on cases that have been dropped. So they basically were able to cover up their own tracks on this case after they had literally destroyed this man's life. So it's really, I think, a very, very troubling use of the power of law enforcement, and unfortunate for Thomas, too.
You know what was interesting? Some of the comments here, and I've been doing my best to throw some of them up on the screen. Someone said, I think it's Alan Killian, field sobriety tests are all about collecting evidence against you.
Right.
And I think earlier, it might have been Catman, and I apologize if this is incorrect, but they said the field sobriety test is about as accurate as the K9 test. So we've seen, we've seen some terrible ways K9 have been used as an excuse to be able to access someone's
The thing
vehicle.
that's alarming is there's an entire industry of DUI, aggressive DUI, traffic enforcement that is built upon the field sobriety test. So it's quite alarming how subjective and unscientific this is, and yet it's used to such an extent that, really it can put someone in jail, you can lose your license, all sorts of horrible repercussions. And also, I think maybe there's a lot of drunk people that could pass it to be even worse. So I don't know what the answer is to this question, but I do think we need to stop walking around and thinking, or at least as mainstream media, as reporters, we need to stop this idea that somehow there's some scientific certainty in this process of, field sobriety tests.
And we've got some great comments in here. Some of them I wish I could put on the screen, but I can't put all of them on the screen. But some of them are very funny, John Eagle. So as we move on, given the consequences for Thomas and the very flimsy evidence, we decided to spend some time not just on how to protect your rights, but also trying to understand why cops do what they do. Meaning, why do we keep seeing this type of abuse of power over and over and over and over again with very little actual reform? Why do cops continue to make bad arrests? And why, when they are clearly presented with evidence, do they continue to try to entrap people when it would just be so much easier to just let them go and allow them to move on? I think this aspect of law enforcement has become more fascinating and at the same time more inexplicable for me. I mean, and bear in mind, I watch a lot of videos of police encounters. In fact, I've spent the past 5 years just knee deep in body camera and cell phone videos of police behaving badly. And many times when I do so, I find myself asking the same question. Why can't the cop just walk away? Why do they so often escalate? And what can I do to help people overcome bad policing? And I'm hoping that I have at least part of the answer, because often we don't know our rights, and even more importantly, how to apply them given the circumstances. And I have watched many a routine encounter with a cop go wrong, and I am struck by just how subjective it can be and how much dissembling police often do. How often they simply ignore the law, or in the worst cases, just make up their own rule book entirely. And that's why we're going to address this. So let's call it the law enforcement knowledge gap. And we're going to do so by having a series of discussions to share that information to help you and help close that knowledge gap. Because I literally watched 3 deputy sheriffs destroy Thomas's life, and I honestly thought I need to do something. Not just as a reporter, but as a human being. I mean, not that those two things are mutually exclusive, but meaning,
sometimes they are.
meaning we need to do something. We need to talk about not just why, but how these types of cases continue to happen. And we need to discuss what we can do to fight back. And this is a conversation that involves more than just talking about the law and your rights and other important aspects of our legal system. It's also discussion about the underlying imperative that drives all the ills mentioned earlier. A system that trains them to embrace a psychology, the idea that their job is not to police for us, but against us, to use the law as a barrier, not a common set of rules for everyone. I think we have to try to understand what and who these cops are really working for and why often they seem to have other priorities besides keeping us safe. I mean, Stephen, I think we've probably had this conversation a million times before about the underlying imperative that drives policing. But why is this important? Why even talk about it? Why aren't we just showing videos of bad cops?
Well, I think, it's very important when we look at a case like Thomas's and other cases we've covered that there's this sense when you report on it that this is an example of law enforcement gone wrong. But I think what we need to do in our conversation is flip that around. This is actually, in some sense, if you examine the system, what we call the system that allows makes bad policing possible, this is an example of actually, I think, from the perspective of the way law enforcement is construed in this country, of law enforcement succeeding. And when I say that, you're like, what are you talking about? Why is that success? It's because law enforcement is not construed in many ways for public safety, as many of our cop watchers point out. It has a million other agendas. I think there's this famous saying, the arc of justice, the arc of the universe bends towards justice. Well, the arc of the law enforcement universe bends towards inequality and bends towards enforcing laws, that are about monetizing processes, monetizing poverty, monetizing many social ills, so that when you see a case like Thomas, you're not saying law enforcement has gone bad, which is the way we report it, and of course that's kind of the way it's perceived. It's also we have to think about it. Maybe this is the way law enforcement is intended to work in many of these cases. It wouldn't exist if it didn't. If the powers that be didn't want law enforcement to make these kind of so-called mistakes, they wouldn't happen. And that's why we have to acknowledge it and think about it in kind of a different way, right? We have to sort of say, wait, this is law enforcement working as it's intended to work. And when we look at it that way, I think we have a better chance, a better way of pointing out what's wrong with it on a systemic level, not just on the individual cases. I mean, you and I have watched enough body camera to know things go bad quite often. But we have to be able to look at it in a larger picture and say, well, what's working here? Why isn't it working? And it's not working because it's not intended to work for the people, for the working class of this country. That's not how law enforcement is constructed, and that's not how we see it work. And so when we report on it, we kind of have to flip it's like narrative inversion, right? We're trying to come up with a way to tell the story in a different way so that we understand, okay, it's sort of the idea I've talked about police corruption. There's no such thing as a corrupt police department. There's a corrupt society that creates and begets a corrupt police department. The corruption in the police department simply reflects the power structure, the elites, and the society it really serves, not the people. So we have to kind of dismiss this notion that there is corrupt, and then over here there's this great utopian police department that comes out and serves the people. And that can sound a little harsh, but I think sometimes when you see the things that happen and we see people's lives just destroyed, and everyone I called, no one wanted to talk about Thomas, no one wanted to talk on behalf. Right. This guy served his community for 30 years as a first responder, and they throw him out. So you say the system's not that indifferent. Oh, yes. We know how indifferent it is because every time we call on people's behalf whose lives have been literally torn asunder, no one responds. People will be like, we're not going to talk about it. We're not going to talk. The Department of Public Safety, remember, we're not going to talk about it. We can't talk about this, blah, blah, blah. But you sure can charge him. You can fire him. You could put him in jail. You could make him hire a lawyer. You could do all that. But what you can't do is talk about it. You can't explain why you ruined this man's life. And that's what I'm trying to say. Like, law enforcement is not constructed around serving the working class and the people. It's constructed around, an elite sort of way of parsing us and saying, you're here, you're bad, you're good. We're the heroes. So anyway, sorry, I didn't mean. I know.
Look, you get fired up sometimes.
Well, yeah.
I just gotta let you.
I think I got a little upset when you called me inside.
Maybe
I'm
that's
you,
where
man.
it came
I am
from.
so happy out there, and Max gives me one bag of corn nuts every night. Max, I know you're watching. He says, Stephen, you can have this whole bag.
You will get us sued eventually with these corn nuts.
Oh God,
you
right.
know you will.
He gives me a bag every night. It's pretty cool. Not many employees have those kind of benefits. Union power. Anyway.
So I just want to let you know, for some of the people who have put in questions, I'm putting them aside for later. So if there are any questions or comments, I'm going to make sure to put them aside, and I'm going to throw them up on the screen later for when James Freeman and James Madison join us. And back to moving forward. I think when we talk about our rights, we have to remember, based upon our experience reporting across the country, we have learned that quite often our rights are conditional, meaning they've either been watered down by the courts or in the name of the drug war, or simply ignored in the service of racking up stats for fines, as we've seen in a variety of cities and small towns as well. But that idea also applies to something that is important to acknowledge about the law itself, which it is often subject to interpretation. And unfortunately, at the moment, the interpretation of the cop is what we would call in legal terms controlling. In other words, an argument over the law that involves an encounter with a cop is usually hashed out after you've been subjected to it. So it's something to keep in mind when you cite the law, because the officer can simply ignore it while you suffer the consequences. And only after you've been jailed, ticketed, arrested, can you go to court and try to right the wrong. And that is why part of the Know Your Rights show tonight will be focused on getting a better understanding of police, why they do what they do, and of course how they think. And I can think of no guest better than a man who used to be a cop and is now a cop watcher. His name is James Madison, and he is a former law enforcement officer who has used his talents as a content creator to share valuable insights into policing, your rights, and how to defend yourself. But he has also applied his investigative skills to the benefit of the public, as evidenced in his most recent work about breaking the story about a police lieutenant in Daytona Beach who brought his 3.5-year-old son to the station and put him in jail, and excuse me for saying this, but for going to the bathroom in his pants. That same cop also admitted that he previously put another one of his children in jail for a similarly unusual crime. So thanks to James, this story has just started to receive national attention. Let's run a clip of his work.
He's not here right now.
And that's, what's his name? He's new, right?
Yeah, Michael Fowler.
Fowler, that's it. And let me ask you, I guess there's an IA going on. That's why you said this is a big deal. I would hope. I don't know.
I don't know about that.
Okay. Oh, excuse me. Hey, what's going on, Mark? Oh, man, not much. I heard you in a meeting, but hey, I just got a tip or something like that. I don't know if you'll make a comment on it, about 2 police officers that were put their kid in a jail cell.
Yep, I got no comment now, but
is
you
an IA
go upstairs and get that.
Is there an IA active?
I couldn't comment if there was.
You can. The state statute allows you. The details of the IA. There's not one?
No.
Oh my gosh! All right. I do a request for you to see her calendar.
I don't have her calendar.
Who does? Do you know?
Sherry
Schwab
would have all public documents.
Do you know what time she left or when she left?
She left at 10 o'clock.
10 o'clock. All right, sounds good. I appreciate it.
Okay.
And I think you're probably saying the same thing. This is a big runaround, right? And you heard that background noise right. She did not want me going with these elevators. This is a community center, and upstairs is the Public Information Office. Now, this request to her was done in March, 5 months after the initial request.
Here to stand by for them to do their thing, and then we're out of here.
Mike Schoenberg. Thanks so much, man.
Devin Lofcod.
Mike Schoenberg. Hello.
Hi, Kathy with DCF. Pleasure.
Mike Schoenberg. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Let me
yeah. I hear puppies. I hear doggies too.
There are. Just hang on a second. I'll walk
take your time. No worries.
No,
Appreciate it.
No. So I just wanted to let you know that for the follow-up report that James has on his channel, Noli D in the live chat is going to be dropping a link so that later you can follow up and take a look at these incredibly disturbing allegations. He actually has the officer on record saying exactly what he did to his young child. And now I'm going to introduce James Madison. James, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I know. Oh, you are actually on mute right now, unfortunately. So if you can just...
No mute.
Now you're back.
We're good.
You're good.
All right.
I hope I didn't miss it. Yeah, good evening to you. Thank you. It's been a while. It's last time was about 2 years ago. So
yeah.
Well, we're glad to finally have you back. It is absolutely our pleasure. But before we talk about your investigation, I just want to get your feedback. Just to get your opinion on the DUI video that we watched together. Like, what is your assessment of the police tactics? I mean, what could a driver who ended up being the victim of this false DUI arrest, what could he have done to protect himself? What could he have done differently from your perspective?
Well, the least that you talk to law enforcement is always the better. That's it. Is everything you say can and will be used against you, whether it's Mirandized or not. And in this situation here, I was watching that video, and unfortunately, the cops were asking things that my doctor would ask me. And I'm not going to be answering questions like that to law enforcement. Depending on the state by state, you're not required to do field sobriety exercises in Florida. That's specific here. Some of the other states you might be able to or be required to. But at that point, when I know that I haven't been doing anything and I haven't been drinking, I'm going to say, hey, listen, you need to do what you need to do. I don't want to answer those questions. They kind of violate my HIPAA rights. I don't want to have my public information out there or private information out there. And that's where I would have stopped at that one and just said, hey, listen, if you have something, let me know. But when you get stopped by the police, I've stopped people several times. It is nerve-wracking. You're nervous as it is. I mean, that's it. It's nerve-wracking. So you might talk a little bit more, and that's what people do sometimes when they get nervous.
Well, I think that is absolutely excellent. And that Fifth Amendment in our wonderful Constitution, it's the right not to incriminate yourself. Mm-hmm. Please make sure to avail yourself of that. But Stephen, I know I've been doing a lot of talking. Let me give you an opportunity.
Well, first of all, James, congratulations on your investigation. But first, just tell us. So, how did you get a hold of this story? I mean, I'm fascinated. Just so everyone knows, as Taya was saying, a police lieutenant put his son in jail because he pooped in his pants, excuse me. But how did you get wind of this? I mean, this is a fascinating process. This is some really outstanding investigative reporting, I guess. So tell me how first you came across this story. Who tipped you off? Well, you don't have to give me your sources, but how did you learn about it?
Yeah, so just like law enforcement, they're going to be reliant on sources, and so am I, because I can't dig in every little spot and find out. And that's it. If someone wouldn't have came to me and told me about this would have been buried and dead, and nothing would have happened of it. But instead, we learned that they were, on their IA, they were charged with allegations of committing a felony. So that's pretty serious when you have law enforcement doing that. When general citizens run around, if we commit a felony, it's clink time. You're going to be arrested. And so you have to rely on sources there, and thankfully there are a few good cops that are still out there. However, those few good cops, they don't go unpunished, though.
So explain to me how a police lieutenant believes he has the use of the facilities, a jail facility, to bring his child in there, how that even becomes a reality in any way, shape, or form. I mean, I can't even really kind of wrap my mind around who would ever do that to their own child, but how does he get the idea that he can go ahead and do this?
Well, I don't know, and I can't speak for him, but if I were in his position and it was, 20 years down the road or 15, how many ever years he's been there, there's probably some complacency, and there's probably some idea that, hey, I've worked here so long, I can do what I want. And I'm not speaking that that's what he did, but if I was in a job for that period of a long time, that's maybe how I feel. I don't know. I'm not in his shoes. So
now, one of the things you were talking about before the show is that the cover-up is worse than the crime. So when you got this tip, you've this crazy tip, which I'm sure when you first heard it, you're probably like, what? But you get this tip. You're going to be, how are people pushing back, and what are they saying when you first kind of say, hey, I know this information, I know it's true. What kind of pushback and what were people saying to you when you were trying to uncover this?
Well, it was that you felt the resistance almost immediately. You asked for something, oh yeah, you either get a delay or you get an excessive charge. So when I first asked about it, the first time that I was able to speak to someone was there at the elevator. I have had some really good luck look. One of the participants or one of the subjects of the investigation, I was able to somehow get in the same presence of her at a restaurant, and obviously no comment, but was able to ask her a question. Hey, let me ask you about the child. Same thing with the chief. I went to the PD there, and somehow or another that chief is coming down that elevator, or coming out that elevator as soon as I'm coming in there, and it's just been a luck of the draw there with that.
Wait, hold on. That's really interesting. So when you first confronted them, were you saying like the way they responded? You said, because this is pretty smart. You're like, oh, I know this is true just by the way they responded to you. I'm kind of fascinated by that because that's really like some gumshoe kind of reporting.
I mean, we all know body language. You can, if you're married, if you're not, your kids, when someone's lying to you. You feel it. Right. It's just one of those things. Mm-hmm. And when I asked him that question there, and he was reaching to knock on the door to get away from me as soon as possible, I was like, yeah, there's something going on. And at the time that I asked him that, there was no IA, which it was true. There wasn't one, but the situation did occur, and it was something like 22 days after the incident. So there should have been an IA already started.
Right.
If we learn later that you're being alleged that you're charged with violating policy that says you committed a felony.
So do you think your question started the IA investigation, or did they, because then they knew you were snooping around, they knew someone knew about this, so they kind of tried to cover their backsides, in other words, and just try to quickly assemble an investigation?
Yeah, it's possible that's what happened. I don't know. I don't have those details in there, but many times that is what happens in law enforcement. Mm-hmm. It's all swept under the rug until someone finds out, oh, we got to do something about it. I got to smack you with a day off or two, but you're going to have to deal with this now because now the public knows. So, I mean, there is a lot of cover up in different departments. They don't want you to get it out.
Congratulations to you for that, for bringing this to public. But explain that to people who don't understand it. So you're a cop, you see some lieutenant bring his kid and lock him in jail, and you're like, wow, that's really messed up. But I'm just going to keep this under the rug. We're just all going to look the other way. And even though a great injustice has occurred, or you see it in arrests and beatings and all, explain that psychology to people who aren't cops, who don't understand it, because it's kind of fascinating.
Yeah, someone told me one time that the thin blue line is not a brotherhood of law enforcement. It's actually whoever you're loyal to that's in the head of the department. Because if you cross that line, you're out of there. And that lieutenant said that there was people that seen this happening and what was going on. And a few of them came out and said something. They were interviewed by FDLE. But from what I was told by the source is that they were ultimately punished somehow or some way. So that's it. If you're in that psychology there, you see something like this, even though police tell us citizens, see something, say something, and they make our information public. But when a police officer can see something, they generally don't say something because they're afraid that if they cross that thin blue line of whoever's their chief or their supervisor, they're not going to have a job. And if you dig into Shores and look at it, there's been several resignations. A 9-year veteran, I think it was put on probation mysteriously, and there's no record of why.
So you're saying that if you see something really messed up, you're more at risk of getting in trouble for saying something about it than not saying something about it, in the sense that if this person is connected or higher up, like he's a lieutenant, he'll quickly file a complaint against you and put you in the system. That's kind of what you're saying, right?
Yeah, you're a rat. That's the term. Don't be a rat.
But Jay, that's a criminal term, okay?
Yeah.
That's what like mafiosos call people, rats, right? Criminals, not cops. But there are such as things. I'm not naive, but there are rats in Copland. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, that's what it is. You'll hear that term when you're working there. It's like, oh man, for instance, when I was working, something occurred with a juvenile, and he had a little small amount of cannabis on him, and none of us wanted to do a report. We didn't want to do a report because it took so much paperwork to get this. We took the stuff, threw it down a storm drain. I didn't, someone else did, but took it down the storm drain, which is fine. I would have done it too. Took it, and then the one person that saw it was like, hey, I saw that, we can't be doing that. And the other guy said, what, are you going to be a rat?
Wow.
And it favored the juvenile. It was in the cusp of when cannabis was coming to legalization. But it was, you hear that, and that's what the scary part is you'll be called that, and then you are pretty much blackballed as a police officer, and no one will trust you.
I mean, that just seems so inimical to the idea of having a just system where if you say one wrong thing, your career is over. If you expose anything that's wrong, it just seems to me that the system will ultimately be corrupted by that, right? I mean, there's no way around it that it won't be corrupted if people can't say, hey, you made a mistake or you did something wrong. But if I say anything, it's the end of my career. I just don't see how that system functions.
Well, let me break it down in syllables. It's justice system, right?
Okay.
Just us. That's generally what it is. I mean, you think about it.
Yeah.
But and that happens in every agency. I did another story where a captain of a police department was taking money from a disabled adult. Everybody knew about it, but they turned a blind eye to it. And that's just the way it is in this law enforcement.
So what was a turning point for you where you said, I can't take this anymore? And I know you told this story to us before. It's still fascinating. But where you said, I've just got to not be a part of this system. What was for you? Was there a moment, or was it just a long progression where you said, okay, I'm done. I'm going to be a civilian?
Well, leaving the law enforcement, I was making like $35,000 to $45,000 a year, and I was getting a girlfriend, now my wife, and I just couldn't afford to live like that. It was a low-paying job. I was making $11.08 full-time, and then when I was on motors, riding the motorcycle, it turned into like $16 an hour, and that's after 8 years of work. And then at that point, I said, you know what, I'm done. I'm going to go pursue a career with a father with a construction company, and that was it.
Do you have any regrets, or are you happy with the choice you made?
Oh my gosh, it's so freedom. There's so much freedom when you work for yourself. And ultimately, I started little small businesses that kept us afloat during the 2008-2009 crash, but those blossomed into shipping businesses, and I love it. It's working from home. It's freedom. And after I left law enforcement, I actually watched the guy that is in here in the standby room, James Freeman. I was watching him afterwards, and what happened is I was building a house, and the neighbors were upset. He called code enforcement a bunch of times. Turns out he was married to one of the people at the city, and they just ultimately were after us for building this house, calling code enforcement violations. And that was the turning point. I said, what is going on here? They came and searched my backyard, tried to write me up on code violations, and then the police came, wouldn't let me sign stalking charges against the neighbor. And I said, if they're doing this to me, are they doing it to someone else? I turned on on YouTube, and I found James Freeman. And a couple other people.
I think James Freeman has set a lot of people on the cop watching path.
Oh, yes.
But just let me ask you a question, and this is for me personally. So what do you think is better, being a journalist or being a cop? What do you enjoy more?
Oh, doing what I do now. I love this. I mean, it's intriguing. There's some elements of the surprise when you find something. When you open up an email and you look through the email string and you find some detrimental stuff in there, it is perfect. You get excited for that. You find it, and also you help people all the time, helping people get some satisfaction with law enforcement and some resolution with them too. So
well, I think the public owes you a huge debt for breaking that story.
Oh, absolutely.
That poor child. I mean, I can't even imagine.
I know. And the thing is that I had been listening to some of the video evidence that James had gotten, and I was listening to the police officer describe what he did with the child, saying, oh, I only put the child in handcuffs and in the jail cell for 13 minutes, and I knew the jail cell's really dirty, so I made sure to put them in the part of the jail cell that was the least problematic. And he did what I expected him to. He started to cry. That was the response I expected. And he had mentioned that previously his wife had done the same thing, and he brought the child back because it hadn't worked. Now, interestingly enough, someone in the comments said, it's his child. He can do what he wants.
Ooh,
That's an interesting response.
First Amendment.
First Amendment,
Look, we want to have a robust discussion.
Right, absolutely.
I don't necessarily agree with that idea, but I think the more important point in James's story is that people should know about it if you're going to use a public facility to discipline your child in a very sadistic way. I think the public has a right to know because, James, I mean, in a lot of ways, some of these cops become chronic, right? In some sense where they do one crazy thing and they get away with it and they do another crazy thing, right? I mean, it's not just always an isolated incident.
Yeah, and listen, in our area, there was 2 teachers that were teaching the ESE students, exceptionally education, I don't know the acronym, but they were teaching those students and they were having some issue. They stuck them in a bathroom and locked the door. They were arrested for false imprisonment. And yes, that's different from what the viewer was saying about, we should be able to parental discipline our child. but the trauma that a child receives when they are utilized as they are in something like this. If I don't have dogs, but if I have a dog crate in my house and I stuck my child in there, because guess what? My dog doesn't poop in the crate. It always waits to go outside. I would be arrested for false imprisonment. I mean, that's exactly it. There would be in there. Yeah. But then you add the element of handcuffs. That's just not that. My child is 5 years old. He has some potty training issues sometimes. He has that. Every once in a while he has an accident. We don't go off into some tangent and do that to our child. And I agree that I have a cat in the background.
Well, James, can't you just write him a citation?
Well, I mean, you should be able to do something like maybe conduct a thorough investigation instead of just throwing it under the bus.
Right.
But yeah, I would never absolutely put my child in any cell. I never threaten my children with, oh, there's a cop over there. If you do something bad, they're going to get you, because I want my children to be able to go to a police officer if they need help. Very rare that they would, because they'll be with us and that. But along the lines of, you don't want them afraid of people, because that's what you condition your children for. So.
Yeah. Now, you said before we went on air that you were going to work on a skit, What If a Police Officer Was in Retail? Is that actually something that your viewers can look forward to seeing?
Yeah, so we've got 3 people that are involved in it, and it's going to be banter back and forth. If you walk up to a counter and you say, hey, real quick, I just need to ask you something about there. It will be the responses of the law enforcement, how they would treat you on the street, but it will be in a retail setting. Yeah.
Right. Oh, I can't wait to see that.
I cannot wait to see that. Now, look, I just wanted to make sure there are 1 or 2 questions we have here. I'm hoping you'll stick around. There's one question I had to make sure to ask you because of your level of expertise, James. Yes. And what would be, now this is, of course, you're non-legally binding. You are not a lawyer advice, but what would your advice be when someone is stopped by police while they are in the process of recording? What would your advice be?
So if I'm out there holding a camera and we're you're filming and you're approached and confronted by the cops, the first thing you want to say, sir, am I being detained? And if he says yes, then you say, well, I don't have anything to say to you. I'm just going to stand here quietly. If you have any questions, I want to direct them towards my attorney. I want to have him here during questioning at all times. And that's it. And then it should be over. They shouldn't ask any questions. They may ask you for that driver's license, ID. And you can always ask them. I mean, if you ask more questions than they do, it puts them on the offensive. All right. Am I being detained? Well, yeah, you are. Well, can you just tell me what I'm being detained for so I know what I'm expecting here? What did I do? How do you recognize me as the person that you need to detain? I'm standing here filming, doing a legal and lawful activity. And if they continue on, you may have to provide ID. A lot of people say take the arrest, and that's just one of the things that you never want to do. You can be violated without being arrested, because that starts the criminal justice program. And as you said earlier, 2 years on this case. They will stretch out these criminal cases so that you have nothing for a civil case later on.
Wow, that's an excellent point.
Run out the statute of limitations on the federal.
That really is an excellent point. Yeah. And James brought up something really important, which is, initially it's there can be a stop that's consensual, and then there's a stop that's a detention, right? Yeah. So you need to find out, am I being detained? If you're not, my advice is, get out of there, unless you absolutely feel obligated to continue to recording. Because I personally don't want to see anyone have to interact more with the criminal justice system than necessary. I have seen it destroy too many lives, and I don't want to see anyone else go through that.
And if you say,
even for the best of reasons,
James, can you say, if they say yes, you're being detained, could you say what's your probable cause or what's your reasonable articulable suspicion? Can you go that far, or is it better just not to say anything more?
Well, the reasonable articulable suspicion is for the charging affidavit. They don't have any obligation to tell you that. Okay. But if you can peacefully and get that out of them, well, I think you're suspicious. You set yourself up for an easy dismissal for a case if they do arrest you. Not legal advice, but right. That's what could happen. If they're saying, well, you're just out here and you're walking around with a camera, that's kind of weird. I need your ID. That's not reasonable articulable suspicion of a crime. That's right. You putting some opinion on something that you're trying to make it illegal for me to be here filming. And now you're going to set me up for resisting or failure to ID.
And that's really smart, because you're kind of turning when you say anything can be used against you, you're making the cop explicitly state why they're detaining you, and thus you can use that against them. Yes. I guess if you have it, especially if you're recording, which is why you want to record.
Right. Yeah. Because if you're not recording, then it's hearsay. You can submit the video as evidence, and if they don't have body cameras, that's a cue to get out of there quicker than anything else.
All right. Well, Jim, this has been
That's great. You know what the thing is? There are so many questions I would love to ask you just to like get more details, because I think even I learn something about the law every day. I mean, the criminal code, you know, that section 18 where all the criminal codes, you could literally spend lifetimes going through it and still not come across every criminal code. And unfortunately, unlike police officers, ignorance of the law is not an excuse for us.
No.
So
there's no qualified immunity
immunity for
the
us.
citizenry. No.
Right. So I just think, I guess, should we bring in James?
Yeah,
should we bring in the other James? It's so funny. There are people in the comments who are saying it's ginger night.
It is definitely ginger night.
Whoa. Okay.
Oh my gosh.
So let's bring in James.
Well, you know what? Let me give James. The other James got an intro, so this James deserves his intro too.
Okay.
Okay. So let me give it to him. Now, our next guest is one of the most popular and I would say humorous cop watchers out there. His approach to watching cops has always been creative and innovative, and I think it goes a long way towards revealing the psychology of law enforcement that we have talked about today, because James Freeman has a way of teasing out the truth from cops who really aren't prepared for his approach to covering them. In other words, his tactics often create a power reversal that surprises them to the extent that they tell on themselves. For those out there who don't know James Freeman, let's run James Freeman confronting a cop.
It's the sheriff. I don't know what county though. Criminal Interdiction Unit, State of Texas Sheriff's Office. Looks like license plate readers. Hey, what's up? Yeah, how about you? What department are you with?
I work for Collin County Sheriff's Office.
Collin County?
Yes, sir.
You got ID on you?
I sure do.
Can I see it, please?
You want to see my...
Yeah, please. I need to see your ID.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
No problem.
You licensed to carry that firearm?
Sure am.
Okay. Can you do me a favor and, sorry, hold on. That's kind of loud. That's drowning it. Can you do me a favor while I'm dealing with you? Can we go ahead and put your firearm up for my safety?
Absolutely.
So you might notice here that James is putting a little spin on the way cops ask us questions. Instead, he's asking cops the questions they have a tendency to ask us. But the reason we're talking to him tonight is because now he's fighting for something that I think is incredibly important to almost anyone who believes that power needs to be held to account. And namely, that's transparency, the ability of citizen journalists to cover and report on elected officials, cops, and what they do in their official capacity. It turns out that the Torrance, New Mexico Circuit Court administrators don't want him covering them. It seems that some of James's reporting exposed how the internal workings of the court were often incompetent and even downright absurd. But James's effort to shed light on this has prompted this very public institution to fight back by banning him. And just to show James's work to hold them accountable, we have one more clip for you. Let's take a look.
A New Mexico YouTuber and journalist with nearly 500,000 subscribers is now suing the 7th Judicial District Court.
He says they're not letting him do his job. News 13's Alexis Koneski has that story.
Will you be able to give me all of the details?
His followers know him as James Freeman, a YouTuber who calls himself a government watchdog, documenting the actions of local leaders in law enforcement. But behind the scenes, he's
I started trying to point out government corruption because in my daily life, running a business, I was constantly dealing with issues with this little stuff with the state where they were constantly breathing down my neck.
For the past 6 years, he's been in and out of the courtroom covering cases, but lately he's not allowed.
There are some very specific ones that people have asked me to at least view and show the public what's going on. And they denied me at every corner. Not only that, but they started calling the police on me and tried to have me arrested.
He says it all started back in January when he sat in on a court hearing in Estancia. Springer says he was just observing when a hearing officer yelled at him to leave the courtroom. He later requested the court audio and published a story about what he heard.
He had allegedly told both of the individuals on both sides that it was illegal to cuss at each other in a text message and that they could be thrown in jail for a year for doing it.
As part of that story, he confronted the hearing officer.
I just asked you to leave my courtroom, and if not...
Well, I was told by quite a few people back there that you had demanded that they arrest me and bring me back into the courtroom for a contempt hearing.
Then you were told very wrong.
And that's when Springer says the order came down.
After I ran that story, they made an administrative order saying that I can't come to the courthouse anymore.
Court documents say Springer was harassing staff, but he denies that. He's now filed a lawsuit going after the 7th Judicial District Court, 2 judges, a court clerk, and a court administrator, who he says are violating his civil rights. The goal, he says, is to bring transparency back to the court system.
They're not always doing it right, but they're not always doing it wrong. But transparency is needed.
Alexis Ganeski, KRQE News 13.
We reached out to the 7th Judicial District Court. They said in a statement they do not comment on pending litigation.
So, as you can see, James has applied his uniquely deliberate reporting style to the wheels of justice in New Mexico, and the people and institutions he has put under his own unique microscope just don't like the attention. So, to talk about his fight and the lawsuit and why his coverage is critical in the state of government and cop watching in general, I am joined by Mr. Freeman himself. James, thank you for joining us.
Hey, thank you so much for having me on again. It's always a pleasure to be with you guys.
Oh, it's so great to see you. First off, I have to ask you, are you still asking cops the same stupid questions they ask us?
It doesn't work as well as it used to because I've gained such a reputation for it that they already know that it's coming. I approached a Farmington, New Mexico police officer just yesterday and was going to try and get that going, and right off the bat he goes, "Oh, Mr. Freeman, your reputation precedes you." So it doesn't work as well when they know it's coming. So.
That's great.
Sad.
I mean, I'm disappointed, but I'm glad that your reputation precedes you.
Yeah.
I think that's just terrific. And I'm also I was so glad to see that the mainstream media actually acknowledged, A, that a cop watcher existed, and B, that they can actually do something useful for the community. How was that process interacting with the MSM, with your local news?
You know, I wasn't entirely shocked myself because what I'm dealing with this court, the mainstream media is also dealing with. We are all constantly trying to get the truth of all kinds of stories out there. And government, it's not just us cop watchers and independent journalists. They try to stop everyone from doing it. And so I think that the mainstream media realized if they're going to do this to me, they're going to do it to them as well. And so a precedent needs to be set here that this is unacceptable, and that it's not going to be allowed.
So is this a federal lawsuit you filed, and is this a municipal, like is it a circuit court, or what kind of court? Is it a state court that this is occurring in? Just to understand some of the details.
This is a district court, and
Okay.
New Mexico, it's kind of a rural area, so it actually covers, I think, 4 or 5 different counties.
Okay.
And we did file the lawsuit in federal court simply because we didn't believe we were going to be able to get justice anywhere in
That's
any
very
of the New
smart.
Mexico courts because we believe that they're getting their orders from the Supreme Court of New Mexico.
So is this like a First Amendment case, or what's your basic argument? And I'm fascinated by this because we have the same problem here in Maryland. So is this a First Amendment case, or what are you arguing in your suit?
Yeah, so what they did is after I ran that story, they made it an administrative order saying that I can't come to the courthouse.
At all.
And unless I have official business, but they don't
Okay.
recognize reporting on their corruption as official business. They don't
Of course
recognize
not.
that. And so essentially what it did is there was no due process either. There was no hearing. There was no trial. It was just, boom, your First Amendment rights are gone, and there's no due process. I continued to go to the court, and I continued to report anyways for about 3 months. And then finally the judge said, all right, you violated the order. We were already getting ready to file a lawsuit simply because of the order itself. And then one day the judge said, you know what, you violated the order by continuing to report on us. We're going to have you come in for a hearing, and we're going to try to throw you in jail for contempt of court for
my
disobeying
God.
the order, violating your First Amendment.
Well, now, James, this is very disturbing because there's nothing more public than court. Nothing where there's more laws about, what should be public, a court hearing, evidence. What basis did they use to order you out of a courtroom? Like, what was their I don't even see where they'd have a legal basis.
So no, they definitely don't have a legal basis. But the state of New Mexico, the court system, there's a reason they don't want me in there, and it's because they don't use the law in their courts. They use whatever they feel like at the moment. What they put on the actual administrative order was that after I ran the story, there were people who viewed the story and called the courthouse to redress grievances and to let them know, hey, we're upset with what you guys are doing here, and we want you to get your act together. And so they specifically articulated in the order, you cannot come to the courthouse due to the fact that other people have contacted us. And they claim that it was on my behalf. I mean,
You can't
obviously
control
I
that.
didn't. Right.
Right. Yeah.
And so they didn't even ban me for anything that I did. They banned me for things that other people did when they saw the corruption that I published.
I mean, this is so like ridiculously First Amendment fraught wrong that it's hard for me to understand. It just sounds like they're just, like you said, making up the law as they go along. So then they have a hearing. You said what happened in the hearing? Was there actually really a hearing? I mean, was there evidence presented and arguments made, or what actually happened?
So once they decided to schedule that hearing, my lawyers fast-tracked it and said, that's it, we're filing the lawsuit today. There were a few other things we were waiting on, some open records requests because once you file the lawsuit, they're gonna clam up on everything and not give us anything. And so we were trying to wait until we had some more evidence of the things that they were doing. Once they said, hey, let's bring him into court and throw him in jail, we immediately filed the lawsuit that day. And the judge had to recuse herself. We asked for injunctive relief from the federal court, which they haven't even given us yet. And so they've continued to retaliate against me since we filed the suit.
How are they retaliating?
So yeah, there was no hearing.
How are they retaliating? What are they doing?
So there's one of the stories that I was covering in that courthouse. There was another hearing just today for him. And he had asked me to be there to record documents so that I could report on the final leg of his story with that court system. The chief judge, Mercedes Murphy, refused to allow me into the courtroom, and it was just a remote hearing through Google, whatever, Zoom or whatever. But she refused to let me into the hearing. And
wow, it's interesting because you have sat in a courtroom. I've sat a lot in a courtroom, and we know both Eric Brandt had who's another cop watcher, who called a lot of attention to the court process. Just talk about why you see a lot of things go on in a courtroom that just don't really make any sense and don't seem to be following the law. Can you talk about why it's so important to have eyes in the courtroom like yourself? Like why it would be important for people to see stuff or know what's going on?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, in the very first story that I broke on the 7th Judicial District Court in Torrance County, they had said, well, you know what, this is a court of record. We record everything ourselves. Now, previously, a lot of courts weren't even recording audio or video. They just had somebody typing what they could catch. Right. And there were a lot of problems with that. If you go in and actually record, you'll find that the record does not match what you record.
Absolutely.
And I showed that in the very first story that I ran on them, that even though they were recording, they went off the record, and then the hearing officer did and said some things that he later denied he did and said. And the only reason we had evidence that the hearing officer, Gordon Bennett, lied was because there happened to be a deputy in the courtroom with his body camera on during that time that he was off supposedly off the record. These hearings are public. Go ahead.
No, but I was going to say, one of the things I've learned as a reporter being in the courtroom is you think there's this idea of the law and everyone's following the law, but you realize it's really, really up to the, whatever the whims of a judge and can be very capricious. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because sometimes when I leave a courtroom, I'm pretty scared because if I ever ended up there, I don't think I get a fair shake.
Yeah, I'm no lawyer. I'm no attorney. I work with attorneys, and so they kind of show me the process and have specifically shown me while I'm watching court hearings and on hearings that I've reviewed or recorded, been able to go back and watch them with lawyers, and they say, man, this judge isn't even following the legal process. I've got one of my lawyers that's representing me that has a recording of him telling a judge, hey, you're not following the legal process, and he wants to read it into the record, and the judge is yelling at him, no, you can't read the legal process into the record because she just blatantly doesn't want to obey the law. And so she doesn't want it on the record that she's aware of what the law is.
Do you think, I mean, I know we both know Eric Brandt, he's now in prison for threatening judges, and it's a very interesting
Allegedly.
case. But allegedly, exactly.
Correct.
Thank you for that. And but he would always say judiciary does not get enough attention. Is that something you agree with?
Absolutely. And they've been, I mean, you talk about qualified immunity for police officers, judges, prosecutors it seems to be absolute immunity. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to be absolute immunity, untouchable.
Yeah, no, and it's a little scary because, really, when you think about it, traditionally, prosecutors or at least judges are supposed to be a check on police and other types of law enforcement. But often, I mean, what I've seen is that judges pretty much are in cahoots with police in so many cases. And I mean, we've had many corrupt cops who have run through courts forever, lying, just blatantly lying, and cops and judges doing nothing about it. And I guess that's what you're trying to, sort of watch out for in this court system, right?
Yeah, and I've been trying to show people too, look, this whole system of 3 branches of government and checks and balances, that exists for a purpose. These branches aren't supposed to be working together. They are supposed to be butting heads. They are supposed to be challenging each other.
Agree.
They are supposed to be refusing to cooperate with each other. And I'll tell you what, with this case, over the last 3 months, I have seen something that I never thought that I would see in my lifetime. The local law enforcement in this area have refused to enforce the judge's orders. Wow. I have been ordered to be arrested multiple times by hearing officers and judges, and the Torrance County deputies and the local police department next door. They have tried to call in every police department possible because none of them will touch me. And it's because they know that what the judges are doing is wrong.
So wait, a judge has literally issued a bench warrant for you, or just an order to arrest you for no reason?
Yeah, just an order to arrest. Said, hey, you know what? He came to the courthouse. He wasn't supposed to come to the courthouse to report on us. It was a hearing officer just a couple of weeks ago ordered me to be arrested, and I haven't even uploaded the footage yet. And the 2 deputies are saying, well, he's not doing anything illegal. We can't arrest him.
Yeah, I mean, this is an administrative order. This isn't, you didn't break a law. Okay, so how on earth can this judge justify an arrest? I mean, I think the deputies are behaving correctly because they're following the law.
Right.
You're exercising your First Amendment rights, and you violate administrative order. It should be an administrative sanction, not an arrest. What's wrong with this judge?
Well, besides that, the administrative order shouldn't exist in the first place either.
Well,
it
true.
violated due process
right. But I don't understand how you jump to arrest from an administrative order. I don't get it.
I really don't know. You'd have to ask the judges and the hearing officers why they think that. Actually, one of the hearing officers, when he ran out of excuses and realized, we really can't get him on violating this order because even the order says he's got to have a police escort, and I had 2 deputies with me the whole time. He said, well, I'll have you arrested for disorderly conduct then. I said, where did you get your law degree? Do you even know what disorderly conduct is?
It's like this is the go-to, pickup line for cops. I mean, like that. This is just really, really, really concerning. And so, have the deputies at all, or anyone said, "Hey, James, we know this is illegal, and we're not going to enforce it," or is it just kind of implicit? Do they actually tell you, or do they say what their thinking is here?
I don't necessarily want to say, like we were talking about with James Madison earlier. And, that's what's been really, really, really tough about this case for me. People have asked me before, hey, why don't you talk about good cops on your channel? I said, because I don't want them, I don't want to put a target on their back. That's why.
Right.
And it's been tough because some of these deputies have outwardly, you can request the body cam footage. They have outwardly made it perfectly clear. No, they are not going to follow an unlawful order. And a lot of them, it's been really tough because the sheriff at the top, David Frazee, is a nut job who would love to see me arrested, but he won't do it himself, and his own deputies won't do it for him. And so, I mean, some of these deputies have really, really stuck their necks out, and I've been so conflicted with this incident. Going, all right, do I
really
publish this and praise them, or
Well, I think you're wise to let them be, in the sense that, I think, as we've seen, like you said, we just talked to James Madison, there's a retaliatory structure there, and if this comes out, they'll probably be in trouble, and I think probably just be grateful. But that is a really interesting dilemma for you, because you're technically a person who holds cops accountable, and in this particular case, the cops are actually, or deputy sheriffs are doing the right thing. But this is just an amazing case. I mean, really, to me, this is like a premier First Amendment case that the media should be covering all over the country, that you're doing this, you're having this battle, because they could do this to any reporter. I mean, and and one of the things, there's another thing I have to talk about court covering as a reporter, the arrogance of the people in a courtroom. Like, you have your phone open because you need to get a story out, and they'll confiscate your phone. They'll kick you out of the courtroom, if they think you're, I don't know what. I've encountered so many jerk judges as a reporter who have harassed me and just for sit in the back of the courtroom, move over here, don't do that. Or I go to and try to talk to a suspect's family and say, can I talk to them? Why are you talking in my courtroom? And it's not that, I don't understand you have to have an orderly courtroom, but the arrogance of the people in the court system is insane. They think that we're there because they're letting us be there, not because the Constitution has the First Amendment, and not because we're doing a job that is protected, but they make it seem like, oh, we'll let you come in here, you can, but you don't really have any right to be here. And you're a perfect example of that case where they're saying, just because of our whims, we can get rid of you. We don't like what you say, we can get rid of you. There's a lot of arrogance in these courthouses, right?
Yeah. And I think that's why they are going to fight this really hard. We believe that the Attorney General of the state of New Mexico is about to weigh in on this in a very heavy way. Because they've been completely out of control for a very long time and gotten away with everything, and it's wrong. And they know it, and they know that if we set precedent in this case, it's going to change a lot of things across this country.
I hope so.
It's just going to be the beginning, and I think they know that.
So you know what? We have a bunch of questions, both for you and James Madison, but I have one or two questions for you first that I want to hit you with, if that's okay, James Freeman. Is that all right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Just want to make sure. Okay. So the first question is, has flipping the script on a cop ever gone wrong?
Gone wrong. I don't think I've ever gotten arrested doing it. I've done it a lot of times, and I don't always get the results that I want. The result that I want is for the roles to literally be flipped to where I'm the dominant one who's a total jerk, and the cop becomes the submissive one who's like, oh my gosh, what do I do? You start stumbling over his words like we do often when we're confronted by police and we get nervous. I wouldn't say it necessarily went wrong, though.
Now this question is kind of tough, but I did promise that if someone asks, I would throw the questions up there. How do I find an attorney to file a federal lawsuit in Texas? That can be kind of tough.
You're the Fifth Circuit. You're screwed in Texas.
Well,
no, I got you there. That's going to be Brandon Grable and Grimshaw.
Great.
He represented us on the Leon Valley case. He's representing quite a few other people. Actually, one of the cases that you guys covered, a family who was recording police. I can't remember where it was.
Oh, it's Zari
Hoagland. Yeah.
Oh, yes, and she really appreciated your help in helping connect her with a useful lawyer.
We had to connect Thomas with this lawyer because the firefighter who was forced out of his job.
That's a great idea.
Not that it's our job, but we should at least connect them and do them that.
Yes, at least.
Well, thank you, James. That's a great recommendation.
Absolutely.
But I just can't say enough about this case that James, this case is for all the journalists all over the country. We have to go into courtrooms and beg forgiveness for reporting on, what people are doing, how people are exercising governmental power against them. I really, James, I am so impressed and supportive in whatever we can do to help you, and if you could send us a lawsuit, I would like to write a story about it for the Real News, because this could be critical. I don't know how it works, how the interplay between federal and circuit courts, but it'd be great to set some precedent that they can't just make things up as they go along. Ultimately, hope that's what's going to happen. I hope you'll win that.
By the way, we have someone rather insistent in the chat, wants to know, their question is, can I be Freeman's intern? From Matt R. in the chat. So,
do you have interns?
Do you have interns? Do you have an internship program? I wasn't aware you did, but I don't want to assume.
I'm a one-man show.
Okay, a one-man band. Okay.
Got it.
Sorry about that, Matt R.
I'm paranoid, so everybody's a fed.
Oh my gosh, I didn't even think of that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good point. You've got to be really careful.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to deliver disappointing news, Matt R., but I did ask for you. So you know what? This is so great. You know what? I was just thinking, You saw, I have to ask you, just to get your perspective, you saw Thomas's interaction earlier, the firefighter who was put through that field sobriety test. One of the things that really stood out to me is the officers, they take him through all these tests and they're judging him so harshly. One of the things they did was they did a Romberg test where he has to stand there with his arms at his side and his head back and count to 30. And when he believes he counts to 30, he says, done. And so the officer stands there and does a timer, and if you have between 25 seconds and 35 seconds, when you say stop, then it's considered a pass. But the firefighter said stop at 36 seconds. So they considered that a fail of the test. So that field sobriety test was just cruelty. I thought of so many reasons why it would be difficult for someone to pass a field sobriety test effectively. If you'd had a long day at work and you were just a little bit shaky. This gentleman literally had a tumor in his ear. As a matter of fact, I made Steven try to do the field sobriety test and I walked him through it. And I think, honestly, a lot of guys who've been athletic, have tight hamstrings or don't do yoga, won't do well at it.
Yeah,
I'm being honest.
Believe it or not.
No, you don't do yoga, as far as I know.
Right.
But I just wanted to know what your advice would be if someone is stopped for, allegedly for, an investigation to see whether or not they have been drinking or driving, what sort of advice you would give, or what would you say to Thomas? Hey, this is what I would have done in your situation.
Are you asking Freeman or
you?
Or
oh, you.
Madison?
You.
Okay.
You. Sorry. You.
Okay.
You, Freeman.
That is a really tough question, because it seems to me as a non-attorney that you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. You don't take the test, they're taking you to jail. I really don't know. I would almost rather the blood draw, though.
Right.
And besides that, though, there's so many other elements to this particular case that are just bizarre.
I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
I mean, in all honesty, the reason why, even though the alcohol test came back completely negative, allegedly there was a backlog, so the drug blood test didn't come back in a timely fashion. He was dismissed simply for having the arrest charges, not because he was convicted, but because he simply had been arrested. And so he lost his job as a driver engineer, a career he'd loved for 30 years. He said the fire department was his family. It was absolutely heartbreaking. Absolutely heartbreaking.
And that doesn't happen to police, right? When they get pulled over for DWIs, they're put on paid administrative leave quite often, and innocent until proven guilty. And really, that is the way it should be. Even though I'm not a fan of police, that should be the same across the board. That we're all innocent until proven guilty. Very well said.
Well, as we reported on that show, there is a thing that New York police officers get called courtesy cards that they give out to their relatives and friends, and we, speaking to what we're talking about, James, you're talking about good cops getting in trouble. We reported on this police officer who got sick of these courtesy cards because he's pulling people over for reckless driving and all sorts of stuff. And they'd give him this card, and he was supposed to let them go, and he wouldn't do it. And so, guess what happens? He suffers retaliation. His career is destroyed. He's sent to Staten Island, has to work the 12 to midnight shift or whatever. So, there are two sets of laws in this sense, and I think, James, you see that probably every day, right? Or I'm not asking you to agree, but that is something.
That's right. Which James?
Oh my God! Whoa!
Yes, I know.
I'm sorry, I didn't know if we were bringing James Madison back in.
No, Mr. Freeman. Mr. Freeman.
Yeah, absolutely. There are definitely two sets of laws, and really, more than anything else, that is what I'm trying to show on my channel through every single video that I do. Every single, it's we've created these rules and laws so that we can have a civilized society, and we all kind of agree. Look, these are the rules we're going to obey. These are the rules we're going to follow, so that we can all get along and be civilized. And you and I do it. And then there's this class of people that we call government that don't, and that are not accountable to it.
And I mean, the only way that we're ever going to be able to, win that battle and have accountability is if people like you can go into a courtroom and make people uncomfortable. They're not supposed to be comfortable around reporters. I mean, we're not trying to make people uncomfortable. We're not like cops. We're not harassing people, but they're not supposed to be comfortable with everything we report. That's not how the First Amendment works. It doesn't mean that we're rude, but it means that we tell the truth, and the truth makes them uncomfortable. And I just really, we want to follow your lawsuit all the way, because I'm just hoping that a federal court, which circuit is that? Is that the 6th or what circuit?
10th.
10th. Oh, 10th. Okay.
Yep. Same one where we just got the case law out of Colorado from Azaria and
The one where Eric was filming the traffic stop. That one.
Right. Yep.
Yes. Yep. So the 10th Circuit, you have some hope there. I mean, when we were talking to Thomas, his lawyer was saying the Fifth Circuit is really difficult when you're suing cops. So we don't need to get into the details of that. But James, we support you as a fellow reporter, and we will cover this story. And we wish you the best of luck with this, because if you win, maybe I can go into courtroom and actually do my job without getting harassed by a deputy sheriff who doesn't like the fact that I have a cell phone.
Right. Exactly.
As if that's what's really important. But anyway, so I think.
Oh my gosh! First, I just have to thank every single James that joined us here tonight, because I realized we are going a little over on our time, and we have like one or two more things to do. And I really wanted to make sure to like highlight people's comments, so I'm down here in the chat trying to throw comments on the screen. But we might need to move forward a little bit because. Yeah.
It's past everyone's bedtime.
It'll be past everyone's bedtime soon.
So let's get to
we should move forward. And I'll just say, talking to James about what he's dealing with brings to mind how important, essentially citizen journalism is to the health of our democracy. I mean, the hardest hit facet of the news business is local journalism. There's just not a business model that can sustain it. And Stephen, actually, we were talking about this the other day, how YouTubers in some cases have stepped in to fill the void.
Yeah.
Can you talk, I don't know, maybe a little bit about local journalism?
Because as you see with James, the mainstream media, which I came from, you're taught to sort of operate a certain way, but the chaos that's created by lack of accountability and power has to be met with a very creative type of journalism. And that's the type of journalism that James can do, that we do at The Real News. We're much more creative. We follow the case of Thomas to the bitter end. Yes. Most mainstream media would have moved on, but we don't move on. I think that's what James is going to all sorts of court hearings that would get no coverage whatsoever. The only way to respond to the chaos that lack of accountability creates is with creative journalism. And that's why cop watchers and independent journalists are great.
Stephen, that's such an excellent point. And I think there's an underlying question that informs a lot of this discussion, and that's, why is any of this important? Why is local journalism important? Why is knowing your rights important? Why is it important for Stephen and I to sit here and talk to you all about this? And even more critically, why are you, the people who watch us and talk to us and comment on our work, so important to this, our entire question of preserving our right? I guess these are what we would call existential questions, which means in part they are about constructing, or perhaps in what Stephen was talking about, defining the type of world we want to live in. For me, I see in the work of James Madison and James Freeman a struggle to reconcile worldviews that, although not explicitly explained, are at the core of who we are, how we think about ourselves, and how a subtle change in the balance of power can forever alter our lives in ways that I think can be hard to live with. I have a sort of a simple way to boil this down into two words that are critical to understanding what I'm talking about. One is consent, and the other is dissent. One cannot exist without the other, and both are critical to maintaining and expanding our rights to live our lives as we choose, with a government that serves us, not the other way around. Okay, what do I mean? Let me try and explain. I think the whole notion of holding power, cops, politicians, the government in general accountable starts with the idea of consent, the foundation, the assumption underlying the whole concept of governance by and for the people. There lies a simple notion that wielding power cannot occur without the consent of the people. And I think the idea is self-evident in what it means, but still important to re-examine. Consent means that there is an implicit agreement in every government action that we have consented to the use of power for some sort of common good. That means essentially, if police are empowered to write traffic tickets for speeding or reckless driving, we, the people, have consented to this because we believe this use of power is for the good of all of us, and that so-called common good outweighs the intrusion on our personal liberty in order to benefit everyone. So when you see police writing tickets for quotas, or to fund their own salaries, or to accrue accolades, or simply make an arrest just because they feel like it, that implicit consent is being erased. When you examine tools like the field sobriety test, or these fake forensic techniques that are used to incriminate innocent people, they are offensive to us, to all of us, because that's not what we consented to. We didn't consent to erode the Fourth Amendment so law enforcement industrial complex could continue to fight the ill-conceived war on drugs, and we didn't also consent to have our property confiscated without due process so that the police could profit from the spoils of the aforementioned war on drugs. Nor do we consent that America's well-oiled punishment machine could wear us down with fines and fees to fund the same apparatus that continues to grind us into the ground. These things seem intrinsically wrong because none of us consented to them. And that's where the other word, dissent, comes in. Because the way we fight back when the political system ignores our consent is by dissenting. And the best way to do that is by using the process of accountability. For example, affirming our First Amendment rights, filing Freedom of Information Act requests to let those people in power know we don't agree to your terms of service. This is why people like James Freeman and James Madison and other cop watchers, and you know what, I'm gonna list a few.
Okay.
I'm gonna list a few.
Go ahead.
Cop watchers like David Boren and Monkey 83 and Otto the Watchdog and Liberty Freak and the Batusai and Lackluster and San Joaquin Transparency and Chuck Bronson and Blind Justice. And I think I saw Mrs. Justice earlier. Laura Shark, Tom Zebra, Joe Cool, Rights Crispy, Irate Productions, HBO Matt, Corners News, Amanda Acura, Long Island Audits, News Now, Johnny 5-0. So many others are so important. It's also why independent journalists like The Real News or Truth Out or our partners in these times are important as well. And even our mainstream media counterparts, who we do give a hard time on occasion, are vitally important to the process of dissent because it takes all of us to take on the messiness of dissent. Wouldn't you agree, Stephen?
I totally agree.
Well, you know,
yeah.
You describe dissent as messy. And, you know, I think I'd like to give... Do you want to talk about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing. You know, the whole thing with the Thomas story that we unpacked tonight, it was messy. It was messy.
Yes.
It wasn't something you can organize in like a big, investigative piece. You had to go piece by piece and confront different aspects of governance that were really not answering. And the only way you can really do it is by being messy yourself in some ways. So yeah, dissent is not always a clean, and that's why cop watchers and other types of creative forms of dissenting need to exist, because it can't always be copacetic and clean. Sometimes it just has to seem as messy as the system it's trying to address.
And you know what, Stephen, I'm glad you talked about the messiness of dissent, and I'm also glad you talked about how important transparency is and how important it is to have journalists and citizen journalists and cop watchers participate in this. And let me give you an example. It starts with a story of a group of state police officers in Connecticut facing a dilemma. They wanted to write lots of tickets to garner the approval of their superiors and special rewards and promotions. But there was just one little problem getting in the way. People aren't violating the law enough to meet their goals. So you know what, Dave, if you could just put a few clips on the screen so people can see this amazing reporting that was done. But these ingenious, heroic... Oh, you don't have it? That's okay. But these ingenious, heroic cops decided they wouldn't be deterred by the people complying with the law. No. They devised a plan to bend the system and the law to their benefit. What did the cops I mentioned do? Okay, this is what they did. They entered hundreds, if not thousands, of bogus tickets into the system. They simply made up violations out of whole cloth. Now, and investigators say it doesn't seem like these tickets were issued against anyone specifically, which of course raises a whole bunch of other questions about what happened. A preliminary investigation found that over 25,000 fake or inaccurate tickets were submitted, and now almost a quarter of the entire police force participated in some form or fashion. There were a few officers who wrote over 600 bogus tickets each, and they also found that part of the motive was to juice the stats, to show troopers had written tickets to more white motorists in an attempt to dodge an accusation of racial bias. I'm not even going to touch that. But here's the part where both the consent and dissent work together and why both concepts are equally important. That's because none of this, and I mean none of it, would have come to light if a local newspaper had not unearthed the investigation into the fake tickets and reported it to the public. This whole manipulation of the criminal justice system to the advantage of a bunch of rogue officers was kept secret. So secret that until it was reported by journalists protected by the First Amendment, these officers literally had no consequences. That's right. After falsely swearing out thousands of bogus tickets, the officers received only mild internal discipline, a veritable slap on the wrist for committing professional perjury on a massive scale. And these same professional liars were allowed to go out into the community and continue to write tickets, make arrests, testify in court, and earn their lucrative pensions all at our expense. And let me repeat, It was only after a report by a Hearst-owned newspaper, only after the dissenters made us all aware of the issue, did the state government promise to undertake a criminal investigation into those troopers. And now even the governor himself has been forced to call for a criminal probe of the professional fraudsters who are still armed with guns and wearing badges. Now, who in their right mind would consent to that? Rogue ticket writers and congenital liars emerging unscathed. But my point here goes beyond the bad apples, apparently, living happily in the rotten barrel known as the Connecticut State Police. What's more important here is how easily and apparently without conscience the whole system of law enforcement can be used to facilitate widespread abuse of the power for some at the expense of the many. And how little the officers who are supposed to represent us care about that overreach. That is why we have to dissent. Consistency and continually. That's why we need local reporters, cop watchers, activists, auditors, citizen journalists, TV journalists, and of course, even us independent journalists here at The Real News to provide this continuum of dissent that ensures that the government, by consent, remains intact. That's why we need people to use their cell phones to film police. And we need YouTube and citizen journalists like James Freeman and Madison to have access to courtrooms, regardless if it makes someone uncomfortable. What I'm saying is that we need all of us, every single one of us, to contribute, participate, and otherwise join the fight to preserve and expand our rights. No single person can do it alone, but together, I know we can. Right, Stephen?
I'm willing to stay outside as long as it takes.
That's beautiful.
Yep. I'll go right back out there after the show, and I'll be standing out there where you saw me at the beginning of the show doing journalism.
That is actually kind of beautiful.
Yeah. Well,
that is beautiful.
Commitment.
You know what? I think that's actually a great way to end the show.
Absolutely.
With your renewed commitment to journalism, the great outdoors, and corn nuts. So you know what? Before we go, I just have to make sure to thank James Madison and James Freeman for taking the time to be here with us, to share their insights, to share the incredible work they're doing. If you haven't already gone to their channels, you should definitely check them out. And I know you folks in the live chat had noticed there's some amazing cop watchers in there too. Maybe you want to go check out their channels. And I want to thank the mods of the show, Noli D and Lacey R. Thank you both for your support. Thank you for sticking by me, for showing up every Thursday and just being an incredible help to me. And also a very special thanks to our Patreons. We appreciate you so much. And in 1 second, I'm going to thank each and every one of you personally, especially my associate producers, John E.R., David K., Louis P., and my PAR super friends like Pineapple Girl. I saw you in the chat. Hi, Pineapple Girl. Shane Bushta, Chris R., Matter of Rights. But I want everyone watching to know that if you have video evidence of police misconduct or brutality, you can reach out to us. You can email us directly at par@therealnews.com. If you follow me on social media at Tea's Baltimore on Facebook or Twitter, you can also reach out to me there. We have a Police Accountability Report Facebook page. We have a Police Accountability Report Instagram. We have a Police Accountability Report Facebook. So if you want to contact us that way, please do so. We're actually going to be taking about a week or so off just to go through the tips we've gotten. We have some shows in the works that we're working on. We're doing an extra big show coming up. I think we're going to be dipping back down into Texas, and it's going to be an in-depth show. We're working on it now. It's going to take us we've been working on it for the past 2 weeks. So that means it's going to take us 3 weeks to complete this show. So I really hope you'll stick with us to see it. And of course, we want to be able to reach out and help the people we can. Like I've mentioned before, there are a lot of conversations I have with people, interactions via email or messages where there's never a show produced. I just try to connect someone to legal aid, legal help. I try to help someone fill out a Freedom of Information Act request, or just try to give them some general advice and guidance just to help them. And there's never a show that comes from it, but it takes a lot of time to go through all those tips and emails and comments. And I want to do what I can to help support people. So just so you know, I'm going to shout out all my Patreons, and I want to thank each and every one of you that showed up here tonight to participate in this conversation. I love the live chat. I wish I could have put even more of your comments up. And now for the great reading of thanks to the rest of my patrons. And I apologize if I don't get a name right. First, thank you to Matter of Rights, Shannon P., Cameron J., Farmer Jane USA, Joseph P., Marvin G., Kimmy Cat P., Dur Devil, Nope, Kurt A., Patty, Angela True T., Social Nationalist, David B., Marcia E., Daniel W., Zira M., Louis P., William T. G., DBM, Sushant, Kemi, John K, XXXX, Potshot, Kenneth Lawrence K, Stephen B, Blibbit, Cindy K, Dante Kipke S, Seskel S, John M, Keith B M, Joe 6 Estate AZ, John Miller, Gary T, Janet K, Ryan P, Mark William L, Noli D, Kyle R, Guy B, Calvin M, Stephen D, Ron F, Alan J, Trey P, Julius Geezer, Omar O, Umesh H, John P, Ryan, Lacey R, Rod B, Douglas P, Andrea J O, RBMH, Siggy Young, Stephen J, Michael S L, Default Urine, Celeste DS, PT, Just My 2 Cents, Talia B, Peter J, Sean B, K A, Joel A, Tim R, Larry L, Ronald H, Tamara A, Artemis LA, John K, Jimmy Touchdown, TrueTube Live, Kenny G, A is Circle of the Quantum Note, Brian M, Byron M, Felonious Punk, Loretta S, Mike K, and to the new patrons, Michael Willis, Jodis, Frank K, Mary M, we appreciate you, your support, and to help make our work possible. And remember, if you have video evidence of police misconduct or brutality, please share it with us and we might be able to investigate for you. Please email us the tips privately at par@therealnews.com. Thank you so much for everyone who was here tonight. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. I know it was live. I know it was glitchy, but we did it with love, and we appreciate you so much. Please be safe out there.
Thank you so much for watching The Real News Network, where we lift up the voices, stories, and struggles that you care about most. And we need your help to keep doing this work, so please tap your screen now, subscribe, and donate to The Real News Network. Solidarity forever.